If there's one thing that will always get me out of bed, it's a good old-fashioned survival horror game. Doesn't matter how good or bad it is, those style of games have always been one of my favorites to dive into and play outside of RPGs. Plus, luckily today, the game I'm talking about happens to be on the good side of that scale, which is called Hollowbody, an indie survival horror being made by a single dev inspired by the classics such as the Silent Hill series, which I believe it does an incredible job of capturing that feel while staying distinct. So with that said, I'm ready to dive into this demo and break down why I'm so excited for this game, starting with the general atmosphere and setting of the game. So, Hollowbody takes place in this strange British dystopian city exclusion zone that's sealed off where everything is decaying away, and it's basically suicidal to go into a place like this. But the main character you play as, whose name is Mika, is looking for a girl named Sasha. Unfortunately, while flying over this zone, Mika's hover vehicle ends up crashing, so now you're truly fighting for survival instead of it just being a search and rescue type mission, which I'm curious to see where this story goes in the full game, because this world is incredibly interesting to me as a survival horror setting. It has these futuristic elements with like broken industrial mechs and talking robots, not to mention the environmental storytelling is very interesting as you're exploring this apartment complex that you eventually end up at after traveling through these streets with overgrowth and abandoned vehicles leading up to it. And these two environments in the demo really couldn't feel any more different, with the streets being very open, allowing you to see the destruction of everything clear as day, while highlighting how void of life this place is. But then when you get inside the apartments, everything is much darker and claustrophobic, visibility is limited, and the fixed and moving camera angles really add to the tension by not really allowing you to see what comes next fully. It really does create this very intense atmosphere that draws the player in. Also, because of the sounds and color palettes that's been chosen for the environments, you get these moments like when entering certain rooms where a flash of color or sudden music can be used to either escalate the tension the player feels or also signal to them something could be coming that's important or dangerous. Really is well done, not to mention it adds to how the environmental storytelling hits as the player explores this world more and more, which the lead up to the first monster hits amazing thanks to this care, from a lifeless world to dark hallways to sounds being heard from across this apartment complex to finally coming to a door with a blood trail in front of it. This build up to the first encounter really is handled with so much care, but obviously visuals and themes only go so far. What about gameplay? Well, the gameplay feels pretty good for the most part. Like typical old school survival horror games, you have these panning or fixed camera angles that can make encounters with enemies very tense. Since you're not in control of the camera, you may not be able to fixate on them at all times, leading to the player needing to move in the environment for an optimal line of sight, while also making sure if needed, they can escape. Though I will say in Hollowbody, unlike some survival horror games, you're not fixed in place when attacking. You can actively move around while fighting monsters, whether you're using a gun or a melee weapon, so you have a little more freedom in that decision making, and what surprises me most is how good the melee combat actually feels. Guns are usually easy to nail in games like this, but melee combat, not so much. Usually melee combat can feel very frustrating to use because of either the reach of the melee weapon or how monsters attack and so on, but in Hollowbody, it just simply feels great. Also, I should mention, you also have a simple dodge for emergencies if needed, though I never really found a situation I needed to use it for in this demo. Then of course you have various items you can find in the environments that are used through the player's inventory system, like any survival horror game would have, which I will say I love the futuristic feel of it. It kind of reminds me of Signalis a little bit. Then, outside of combat, there are puzzles to solve, which, as anyone who knows me, I love having puzzles in my horror games to break up the combat gameplay and just the general exploration. And the one puzzle featured in the demo really makes use of that environmental storytelling I mentioned earlier, actually making the player use their brain to figure out the correct solution, which was really nice to see. Then moving from there, some of the things I ran into or had issues with are pretty minimum and may or may not be an issue in the full game. First off, I really wish we had tank controls. It's just a movement scheme in these fixed camera style games I will always prefer, just because it could be a little strange going from one camera angle to the next movement wise if it's a completely different perspective. Plus in combat, this can make things awkward, so just being able to hold up to move straight makes this a non-issue. Next, I'm not sure if this is intentional or a glitch, but I couldn't target or lock onto enemies off screen, so having that be in the game would be super useful. That way during combat, the player isn't forced to constantly be moving, so the camera can point in a way that allows them to fight any creatures in that area. Also, the flashlight can be turned on and off during cutscenes, which is oddly hilarious, but would be nice if it wouldn't do that since I like to use the D-pad to move through menus or while solving puzzles, which is what it's mapped to by default. Then finally, the controller didn't have the dodge button mapped on any of the buttons, so I had to do that myself, which is whatever. But outside of those, I really enjoyed this teaser of Hollowbody. From the general game performance, it worked near flawless for me. Then the atmosphere, monsters, gameplay, style, and even the voice acting are all shaping up to what might be a very good survival horror game that nails what made the classic so great. Also, the fact that this is somehow being created by a single person is wild. It will always not be one of the most impressive things to me. To have something of this quality by a single dev really shows the care that has went into the game. And if you're interested in this game at all, be sure to wishlist it over on Steam to help support the dev, because if there's one thing I know, you can never have enough survival horror games in your life. Thanks for watching, everyone.